I've got a lot of backlog on videos and questions to do, and so I'm going to try to answer some of the quicker ones as I can, like on break, which is what's going on right now. So one of my old youth group kids asked me I got asked, what should Christians think about Israel? And this was particularly in the context of like the Arab-Israeli conflict. And it's kind of a complex question because there's one thing theologically to think about Israel, and then in terms of secular nations, I'd say there's something else. So let's go over this real quick. A lot of the conflict goes to who has a claim to the land. You want to go back through history. We've got the current divide. We've got the current divided state. And before then, you had I can add a link in the description once this is up. There's a lot of folks who do a much better summary of the history. So to go to the theology first really quick. The modern day Israel is a country that we can judge on its actions and its positions in and of itself. But it is not the old covenant kingdom of Israel. And here's, for Christians, we can go to the book of Romans and look up the passage of who are the people of Israel, the people who are the children of Abraham. Children of Abraham are people who have the faith of Abraham. And that specifically is, and the faith of Abraham was trusting in the future promise of Jesus Christ, and trusting in God's grace and mercy. St. Paul, who was himself an Orthodox, a religious Orthodox Jew, in his upbringing and his training, goes into great detail about this, and there's no point for me reciting the whole argument for you, but you can look it up in the book of Romans. All right, that being said, we can go also to modern proof that we can just go back to the Tanakh. We can go back to the Old Testament for proof that modern Israel is not ancient Israel, because the covenant with modern Israel with ancient Israel for them to have the right to the land involved them obeying the Mosaic covenant and obeying the law, but they don't. Specifically, they have practices that are specifically against the old covenant. For example, the Sanhedrin, so they've redone the Jewish religious bodies, has said, among other things, that you can, there's aliyah, the right for a Jew to return to the Jewish homeland is part of the laws of Israel, and they have ruled on who has the right to aliyah, and you can be of Jewish descent and an atheist, or a Buddhist, or a Jewish descended Muslim. You can be a Jewish descended Jewish descended atheist, you can be a non-practicing Jew, you can be an Orthodox Jew, but the Sanhedrin says the only thing that costs you your Jewishness is you can't be a Christian. If you convert to Christianity, you're no longer counted as a Jew, and you no longer have the right to aliyah as an ethnic Jew. So they kick you out of Judaism. They try to kick you out of your own ancestry if you believe in Jesus. So that's a clear difference between the God, the Trinity, which is present in the Old Testament and in the New, which they should, and the modern. Then, of course, that same declaration violates the first commandment. So they lose the right for the first commandment, which is, you shall have no other gods beside me, and anybody who breaks this is to be kicked out. Right? That's a command in the covenant that gives them the land of Israel. That's part of that promise. And we know from the Old Testament in the Babylonian exile that when they broke it, they were supposed to be kicked out, and they were supposed to lose the right to the land, which they ended up doing. So you violating that, if you're saying you can be an atheist and a Jew. You can't. You're breaking the covenant, the Jewish covenant of Israel, right? That you can be a Buddhist and a Jew, or a Baha'i, or the fact that you can do this, they're breaking the covenant with Abraham. They're breaking the covenant with the Mosaic covenant. They break the Mosaic law all the time. The Mosaic law requires sacrifice and requires displacing people. They're not obeying the sacrificial system. So they've disregarded all of the sacrificial laws. I can go on, but I think that kind of demonstrates it. Now, on the other hand, looking at Israel as a secular country compared to the other countries around it, I am a die-hard fan of Israel. One of the, every country around there has sworn to completely genocidally eradicate one of their neighbors, and the other country is Israel. One of those countries, most of the countries around offer gold and reward for killing, offer money and reward for killing Jews. And when people there's a guy who snuck into a suburban house and he stabbed a housewife and their little boy and their little child and her husband to death, and they had a festival in his honor. And the other country is Israel. You can read a book I would recommend on this. There's two books I would recommend. One is Son of Hamas, which is the account of one of the sons of the son of one of the founders of the Hamas movement, and he, among other things, just talks about being a prisoner of war in Israel. Like he was an Israeli Israel had captured him and was holding him prisoner, and he was listening to other Hamas officers, officers who were likewise torturing their own fellow prisoners in order to get them to confess to, for like sexual blackmail, and he would stay awake at night listening to Palestinians torture each other in order to get power over each other while they're being held up. I can keep going, but basically, if you read the original Hamas charter, the 1988 charter, 1987 charter, it calls for the destruction of Israel as their founding document. You can go and look at translations of their modern broadcasts, and it's straight out of Nazi Germany. The Jews are the source of all problems. It is good to kill them in any place. I don't approve of Nazi Germany in Europe, and I don't approve of the same thing just because you're Arabic. But Israel also has its problems. As an American, I look at like the age of consent laws. Israel, as a Christian, I look at like the age of consent laws and the openly pro-gay laws in Israel. Israel is the most tolerant, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're asking me as a Christian, right? As a secular nation, okay, good. People who disagree with you should be allowed to live in freedom, and I agree with that, right? Israel has Palestinian Muslims in its governing body, in the Knesset. There are members of the Knesset who are observing Arab Muslims. The countries around them have no Jews in power, Israel has freedom of the press. None of the countries around them do. Israel allows, allows in secular terms gay rights and freedom of the press, many other things, and none of the other countries around do. So for those things, I'm going to vote for Israel. Israel's a democracy. The others are the kind of like dictator or like communist dictator type democracies where you have one free election and you never have another free election again. Israel puts its own people on trial if they commit war crimes against the other people, against their neighbors, and all of their neighbors hand out candy in the streets when their people commit war crimes against Israel. So in secular terms, it's really not hard to pick. It's really not hard to pick at all. And in terms of Christianity, I have to look at it in secular terms because I can't justify the idea that modern day Israel has anything to do with the nation, with the covenant in the Old Testament. That Old Testament was fulfilled by Christ. It's done. And we go forward in the New Testament of Jesus. So I hope that answers your question. I know I'm going to get hate comments on this one, but that's my best answer, and I'm out of break time. All right, peace.